Hello, my name is Exabu, and today we're going to cover the third part of 1942 DLC of Panzer II. So take off your greatcoats, get comfortable on the frozen rubble, and order the best horse meat in Stalingrad at Pavlov's. All 5 of the missions we're going to cover today are in Stalingrad, and we'll get to them in due course, but obviously our first item on the menu is my impressions of the DLC, because it's finally over, and my overall impression has been very good. The scenarios are pretty solid, and I enjoyed the way they sometimes smack you in the nose and kick you out of complacency like Grozny does. I appreciated the experimentation of the Air Force missions, and Operation Cerberus is a testament to how these missions can actually be challenging and satisfying, even in a system like that of Panzer General / Panzer Corps that's largely geared towards ground operations. I usually praise the story element in these DLCs. I think war games can get a bit too dour, too sullen, too full of themselves, and having a little story is always a great idea, and 1942 delivers. Wagner is back as an Oberst of all things. There are nice and welcome interactions with the real-life personalities, and all in all, I'm really happy to see that this has become a part of Panzer Corps 2. My final verdict is, if you have liked Axis Operations DLCs so far, you are going to enjoy 1942, there's nothing wrong with it. It's another chunk of Panzer Corps 2 goodness for you. But, as you may have guessed, I have a few criticisms in store as well. 1942 feels a bit watered down, especially towards the end. Some of my commenters have mentioned that Stalingrad doesn't feel as cataclysmic as it should, and I tend to agree with them. I vividly remember the Warsaw scenario in 1939, how much of a beautiful sandbox it was. Streets of Stalingrad, which you could say is the central mission of the Stalingrad section of the DLC, does give you what it should be like around Red October. More about that later, but otherwise it just doesn't feel big or tough. And in any case, we have seen better siege scenarios in Axis Operations. And I probably enjoyed the missions that come after Streets of Stalingrad a little more because of the different weather conditions and all of the logistical problems that snowy weather entails. I also must point out that all of the DLC contains only 17 missions, 4 of which are optional, which is a bit less than what we are used to seeing in these DLCs. My other complaint stroke suggestion is about the Air Force only missions. I really enjoy the fact that the developers are playing around with these kinds of less orthodox types of missions, and Operation Cerberus is undoubtedly evidence to the fact that these experiments lead to great things. The other 2 Air Force only missions, Voroshilovgrad and Bombing of Stalingrad, felt a bit like going through the motions to me. All you have to do to succeed is effectively show up and buy up a few more fighters. There's hardly any room for grand strategic decision making. There are no trade-offs or costs or benefits to any specific decisions. Cerberus introduces this element with the fact that it's a huge map, and you have to balance your planes between different parts of it, which takes time, and bad decisions will take time to be corrected. In Voroshilovgrad and Stalingrad, you can just flood everything with your planes, and all of your decisions are limited to tactical things like the best use of mass attack and aiming assistant bonuses. Both Stalingrad and Voroshilovgrad felt fun. It's always fun to send Rudel to blow up Soviet tanks, but shallow at the same time because you're really not playing a game without decisions. One way I've thought of how to create more of a decision space for the player in these kinds of missions, which I'd like to see more in this game, is adding dialogue options in the briefing. Imagine in the briefing, Wagner tells you that our supply capability is completely overloaded and we can either bring enough fuel for our planes or enough bombs. And so you choose. If you go for fuel, you get a ground attack penalty. If you go for bombs, you get a range penalty for your planes. This way you get a decision that you can't easily back down from, and that will have a strong impact on everything you do in the mission, in addition to possibly creating new ideas for how to manage your corps. In any case, I consider this to be a very interesting topic, so if you have any ideas on how to make Air Force only missions better, please leave them in the comments. I would love to see what you come up with. And my final point is more of a suggestion that has been looming on the horizon for a long time and has been crystallized with the presence of Air Force only missions in the this DLC. We need a way to save our hero assignments. If you have a very experienced corps and have accumulated craploads of heroes over all of the DLCs, it can get incredibly tedious to reassign all of the heroes after you finish a quote-unquote normal mission and have to deal with an Air Force only mission or a mission with a very limited number of corps slots. And it's even more tedious to roll your heroes back into your normal corps. So having the ability to save the hero profile, if you wish, would be a huge quality of life improvement for many experienced players. I can imagine that it's probably not a very trivial thing to include in the game, but come on, we need it. Anyway, this is it for today's complaints from Hexaboo, and let's start with the missions themselves. And we are starting today with an easy one, another Air Force-only mission, bombing of Stalingrad. Similarly to WWII, the ground forces are going to do about 70% of the work, with you relegated to a support role, so here are a few pointers. 1. Expect there to be more resistance in the air than in WWII, and the Soviets will also have quite a lot of weak PO2 tactical bombers, including the Night Witches, so your fighters will have a lot of work to do until pretty late in the mission. 2. Somewhat unsurprisingly, the Romanians are the weaker of the two landlubber factions, which is made worse by the Soviet tank counterattack in the north. While the Germans will also need some help, please do pay attention to the Romanians as well. And speaking of help for the Germans, 3. The Germans will get reinforcements a couple of times during the mission, so if you see them running out, don't worry too much about that. 4. I found that the optimum positions for plopping your bulldozer airfields are about halfway between the first objective hex in the middle and the rail station. I've always found the need to concentrate my planes there. And the other location is halfway between the central rail station and Pavlov's house. You have an objective on the Volga and you need to get as much firepower close to it as possible. And 5. Speaking of that, the objective is laughably easy. The landing crafts unfortunately aren't turning into enemy reinforcements if you are too slow, and there are hardly any Soviet defenses protecting them except for that tiny peninsula southeast of Pavlov's house. The Soviets have very strong anti-air gun presence in the area, so don't even bother sending your planes there. So here's lesson 6. Don't use your planes to support the attack on Pavlov's house. The ground forces will handle it, and you have another suicidal mission to deal with. And finally, 7. Destroying the artillery on the other side will inevitably result in bomber losses because all of the artillery is well covered by enemy AA guns. This is an excellent opportunity for Rudel or any other hero with lightning attack and double strike abilities to shine. Right, after all of the bombing sorties, we are finally on solid ground in streets of Stalingrad, which arguably is the most difficult mission in Stalingrad in 1942 DLC. And despite getting a lot of core slots, the map is way too big for us to be everywhere, so it's a good idea to find one area to concentrate all of our forces and clear the map from there. Oh, and absolutely, clearing the entire map, at least the western bank of the river, is a very real proposal, and my suggestion here is to start at Red October Factory. This is the toughest fortified area in the scenario, mostly because of two very powerful 203mm howitzers that the Soviets have there. They're over-strength and pumped full of heroes, so seeing them shave 5 to 7 hit points off even the heaviest of your tanks is not an uncommon sight. So everything you do in the Red October Factory area should be geared towards preventing these guns from firing. Use recon planes to see where they are, and destroy the units screening them without entering their firing range. Meticulous planning is great for hit-and-run attacks here, even though lightning attack heroes on your bombers would be great as well. But once the screens are down, rush with your tanks and recon units and make at least one of those howitzers history. The other one should fall reasonably quickly. I chose to start my attack northwest of Red October because it allows me to push the factory directly with all of my forces without worrying about the flanks. or having to regroup anywhere. Plus, the initial bulk of Soviet Air Force is in the same area as well. It is within the range of your fighters, and it's a very good opportunity for you to cripple them. The hills southwest of Red October are very attractive in terms of giving some range to your artillery, but I've had a bit of a hard time actually concentrating my troops there for an attack. So maybe having a couple of long-range guns there and maybe a defensive unit might be a good idea, especially since the Soviets will send out tanks to capture the victory hexes they don't own. They will be otherwise passive, but who knows, they might bite your hill artillery in the bum there. Actually, this AI peculiarity in this scenario can be exploited. For example, there are a bunch of non-static Soviet units around the tractor factory, so you can just capture that airfield northwest of it and leave it and lure Soviets out into the open. In any case, once you crush the resistance at the Red October factory, it might take some time because there will be counterattacks. Clear tractor factory, it shouldn't be too difficult of a task, and then make sure to push to that peninsula in the northeast of the map, mentioned in the briefing by the way, and destroy all of the bridging pioneers, actually enabling the Soviet crossing there. You really don't need to take the peninsula proper, even though it's possible, but the Red Army will get crap loads of reinforcements there multiple times, and at the minimum you shouldn't let them cross the river. From there on it's largely easy rising, as you really only have to take Pavlov's house. Holding 6 victory hexes is not all that difficult. My only tip about fighting around Pavlov's house is being careful using your planes there. That little peninsula where the Volga bifurcates is still full of Soviet AA guns. I'll be happy to oblige in turning Rudel into well-cooked beefsteak. I got really good news for you in Assault of Stalingrad. And it's surprise, surprise, the Soviets are not bringing any air force. So forget about all of those AA guns and Feises, you're not gonna need them. And a bunch of bombers might come in handy. Back to our objectives, we are asked to take and defend the Chia rail station, or take the alternative route and defend the Stalingrad airfields around Stalingrad. And my immediate thought as a Panzer Corps veteran was, why are these alternatives? Why not do both? And to be honest, the mission is easy enough for you to pull that off rather handily. So given the small number of core slots you're given for this mission, and the fact that you're going to fight in a large, dull plain, you can skip infantry altogether and get as many tanks peppered with tank destroyers as you can, plus a few artillery pieces and bombers. So the only place where you're supposed to have a static defense is the northern airfield. The Soviets will come in from the north and northwest, and you really don't need to attack in that area. So a tank destroyer and a couple of tanks and having a couple of bombers within range would be a good idea, even though the Soviet attack there will run out of steam. A little hint, once you see a Soviet paratrooper unit next to that northern airfield, closer to the end of the mission, that's probably it. In the south, you should advance as quickly as possible. The Romanian troops will not deal too much damage, but they're perfect as a screen, and with you coming in force, that will help scatter and slow down the enemy. And that's pretty much going to be your plan for the battle. Move south-southwest with your main force, on grind for the Soviet attacks until you reach the Chia station. I've found that the AI controlling the northern Soviet troops doesn't care too much about your southern airfields. I've certainly never seen it attack from Kalach, so you shouldn't worry too much about that flank. Meanwhile, the AI hates the marked hexes that are still not its color, and will send reinforcements to wherever these hexes are retaken. You, on the other hand, don't really need to control any of them. So if you feel that your position is rather tenuous and the Soviets getting any reinforcements, would be a terrible idea, just avoid taking those hexes. Operation Winterstorm is teaching us how to count like a snow-laden, squishy Muppet vampire. 7? Ha ha Ha! That's the number of victory hexes we're supposed to hold at the end of the mission, and it defines the choice of whether to stay on our bank of the river, around Kotelnikovo and Verkhnya Kumsky, or crossing the river and taking positions around the Chia rail station in Morozovsk. And in my opinion, the choice is very easy, and you really shouldn't cross the river at all. The other bank only has 6 victory hexes, meaning that you'll have to hold at least one more on the eastern bank, either defending the hex you hold at the start of the mission, which will get attacked, or reasonably the hex east of Chia rail station, which, surprise, surprise, will also get attacked. On the other hand, keeping to the eastern bank is a much more reasonable proposal because the river will form a natural protection for your left flank. Despite the appearances, the Soviets will not send any bridging engineers to cross the river anywhere other than that railway bridge east of Chia rail station, which is an ideal choke point for holding them off. Just make sure you suppress the artillery overlooking that village from the hills. Beyond that, the main tip is not to rush it. It's very easy to spread out and disperse your troops everywhere, and then just fall easy prey to Soviet counterattacks coming from the north, and they will come more than once. You have plenty of time in this mission, and the general layout of the battle is going to be to push towards Kotelnikovo, clear it, proceed to block that railway bridge. Preventing the Soviets from bringing any reinforcements from the west is essential, and then just move to calmly clearing all of the smaller objectives around Kotelnikovo. As you do it, set up a defensive line east of railway bridge and south of Verkhnya Kumsky. Both AT and AA guns will be very helpful here. As soon as all of the objectives southwest of the railway bridge are yours, regroup east of the railway bridge and then mount an attack on Verkhnya Kumsky. There will be resistance and you'll have to defend against counterattacks, but this way you'll just avoid the Soviets ganging up on your individual units as you reload the game, cursing all of the life decisions you've made so far. The last point I'd like to make is the fact that, surprise, surprise, this whole area is covered in snow, meaning that all vehicles that aren't tracked, or horse, by the way, will get bogged down. This, and Operation Blut, the mission we're going to talk about in a moment, is an excellent opportunity to try out the German assault guns. As a fully tracked vehicle, STUH-42 is very fast in the snow, is resilient enough to be in the first line, and can turn into AT mode if things get tanky. Operation Blut doesn't really expect any special maneuvers from you. After all, it's more or less a straight route from Stalingrad to the Chia rail station, and there isn't too much you can do within the allotted time. So it's worth talking about how to prepare for that trek and what's gonna happen to you during it. First and foremost, Stalingrad is still covered in snow, meaning that all vehicles whose movement isn't tracked should be avoided in your corps. Once again, just like in Winter Storm, tracked assault guns are going to be your friend, with an overall focus on tanks and tank destroyers. You'll probably have to disregard any AA guns, even though, which is point number 2, unlike assault on Stalingrad, the Soviets will bring crap loads of planes. I highly recommend you to bring a huge complement of fighters here. The Soviet Air Force will come in a number of waves throughout the mission, so fighters are absolutely required in preventing this problem from escalating. Point number 3, the main concentration of Soviet troops you'll encounter will be just southeast of Kalach and around the southern edge of the map. This is actually the reason why I prefer splitting my force in 2. One advancing along the railway or just north of it, and the other one going to clear the area just southeast of the railway. This will make it possible for you to preventively destroy any possibly counter-attacking forces in these areas and not have to worry about those convoys which will inevitably fall behind, getting attacked by any stray T-34s later in the mission. Both your groups should converge at the railway bridge leading to the station. There will be some Soviet defenses blocking this choke point, but once you reach it, the mission is effectively over, and you will only have to kick enemy infantry out of the station and bring your lorries and half-tracks to the evac zone. And this is it for today. Despite the complaints, I really enjoyed this DLC. I'm really looking forward to the uncharted waters of the Pacific campaign in the future. And you could also expect a number of Panzer Corps 2 themed videos soon. But for now, like, subscribe, share, and goodbye.